Hello and welcome to the report of the third round at the BPB Limburg Open. So in the second round we saw quite a few draws in the top boards, which results in an interesting pairing in the third round between Sokolov and Bauer, one of the two favorites. Well, there are two favorites to win the tournament. And so it's pretty early on, but I was expecting quite an interesting match, and well, they delivered. It started pretty quick in the opening. D4 and Bauer responds A6. Not something you expect on the top board between two strong grandmasters. But what happens is quite clever. Sokolov plays E4, Black goes E6, and all of a sudden Black is steering into the French. And which is not something Sokolov really wants, because he hardly ever plays E4 these days. So suddenly they're in the French, actually the Tarish defense, the Tarish line in the French, and with the move 3a6, in case you want to check out the move order. And Bauer is doing this pretty clever, because he's steering into the most complicated line of them all with g5. And if you have no knowledge about this line, it's going to be very difficult to find the right moves. And so also Sokolov struggled quite a bit. He took on c5. Knight b3 is the main move in this position, but I'm not sure if he was aware of this. So he took on c5, g4, knight d4. Black took the pawn e5, and Black is quite happy because he managed to destroy White's pawn center quite easily. Knight to b3, Black grabs the bishop, queen takes, and he goes e5. And even though both players spent quite some time at this point, this is still theory, and actually it's just already better for Black at this point, I think. Rook e1, bishop g7. Now White decides to take the knight on c6, and as you can see, Black is building a huge pawn center. Knight d4, queen f6. White is just trying to attack the pawn center, but it's going to be difficult. Pawn takes f3, knight takes, queen e7. He just makes sure he defends his pawn at all times. And f6 is going to come very soon, and then White is going to have a lot of trouble trying to weaken this pawn center. So Black already has a very comfortable position at this point. White goes bishop g5, sacrificing the c pawn. Bishop d3, queen d6, bishop d4, f6. Now b4. Okay, so White is doing quite okay. He sacked the pawn, but he did manage to at least block Black's pawn center a little bit. So he goes knight h4, and it's quite difficult here for Black what to do, because the king can't really castle, well, you can't castle kingside, can't really castle queenside because the a6 pawn is hanging. So Black is really looking for a plan, and it's not easy, as you can see. Bishop h6, queen f3, and he goes back to g7. So now some maneuvering starts. Rook g8, rook f1, bishop g4, queen f2, bishop h6. And here Sokolov makes an interesting decision, because instead of retreating the rook, he decides to sacrifice the exchange, which is not such a bad idea, because the Black king is still in the center, and if he manages to get hold of the Black square bishop, then he might have some compensation with the opposite color bishops. Because h3, interesting move. Black decides to grab the exchange, queen takes, bishop e6, and rook takes f6. And as you can see, Black's pawn center collapsed. And his pawn center was quite important to protect his king, which is still in the center. So Black decides to castle queenside now. And here Sokolov makes a huge blunder. He could have just taken the pawn on e5. Black does get the pawn on h3, but the position is still probably slightly better for Black. But White has very good compensation here for the exchange. And with the dark tri bishop, he might have some chances to weaken or put the Black king under even more pressure. So this would have been still an interesting game. But he blundered big time. He played knight f3 and allowing queen g7. It's a simple double attack. Oops, sorry. It's a simple double attack on the rook on f6 and threatening checkmate on g2. So all of a sudden it looks game over immediately, but he still has to move queen g5. Not losing any material, but he's exchanging queens, and without the queens, the Black king is perfectly fine. Queen takes, knight takes, rook takes g5, rook takes e6, and we just end up in his endgame, and now being exchanged down really hurts. So Black decides to push the d pawn straight away, which is a good move. C takes d4, e takes d4, rook takes c6, so he's giving a few pawns, that's fine, because he just wants a d pawn to reach d1. It's the most important thing for him at this point. King b7, rook b6 check, king c7, rook f6. He goes rook d7, just to protect the 7th rank, I guess. Rook takes a6, and here Bauer just decides to start running with the d-pawn. But that is a huge mistake. I think he simply missed White's threat, which isn't too obvious, but once you see it, you think like, yeah, well, that makes sense. White goes rook a7 check, and suddenly Black can't really get out to perpetual. If he goes to c8, rook a8 check, goes back, rook a7 check, and he can't really hide. And if he goes to c6, White is b5, and I think that's what he missed. Black is forced to take the bishop, and now you lose your rook, and suddenly you're down a few pawns with Black, and you need to, well, you probably can't hold his endgame. So he also can't go to c6. So that means king c8, rook a8 check, and the game ended in a draw here, which was such a crazy end of this game. All of a sudden, it looked like Black had a winning endgame, which he had, but then he missed this draw maneuver by White, and yeah, I guess he will regret this for a while, because he had a very good opportunity to beat Sokolov with Black, which is huge if you can beat one of your main rivals with Black so early on in the tournament. So yeah, Sokolov, well, escaped there, and that means there's opportunity for other players to take the lead, and that's also what happened, because two other players with 2 out of 2 played each other, Koen Leenhouts and Dirk van Doorn. Dirk van Doorn, who beat Alexander Fier in the morning round. Very nice game. Now playing with Black against Leenhouts, and I'm just going to jump to the position after move 22 for White. And as you can see, White didn't really get out of the opening what he wanted. He's quite passive. Bishop on e1 is not so pretty. Black's pieces look nice. Black is active. And as you can see, this bishop is just struggling against, you know, all these pawns. I mean, look at these pawns. How is the black square bishop ever going to survive against these pawns? It's going to be extremely difficult. So at this point, Black probably figured out it's time to try and, well, maybe push for the win a little bit. So he played a4, which makes sense to block both pawns on these squares, and also to weaken this one a bit. So White goes queen c2, attack the pawn. Black goes b5, putting more pressure, but I think here's where things are going wrong, because he doesn't really have his pieces positioned correctly to exert some pressure. Now White goes rook c1, c6, and as you can see, there's some trouble, because we have 3 pieces on this diagonal, and that is a bit scary in my opinion. So White decided to go knight e4, which is a very logical move, because that makes way for the bishop to go to b4. So Black takes on e4, queen takes, and bishop b4 is quite an annoying threat at this point. So Black decides to play knight d5. But as you can see, also c takes b5 might be a thing sometimes, even though the pawn is still pinned. And White has several good moves. For example, rook c2 is a nice move, simply protecting the rook, threatening to grab the knight on d5 or the pawn on b5. And it's just not so easy for Black to find a good square for the knight. Actually, it is impossible. I can just show you briefly why that's going to be difficult. If the knight goes to b6, bishop b4 is trapping the queen, which hurts quite a bit. Knight c7 is probably going wrong because of c takes b5, and the c file is too weak. You're just going to drop the c pawn. And the knight back to e7 also allows bishop b4. Queen a7 only square to protect the knight. You can just grab the knight, queen takes, and take the pawn on b5, and the c6 pawn is pinned. So you're just winning a lot of material here with White. Well, at least an important pawn, and probably a second pawn as well. So rook c2 would have been a nice move, probably forcing Black to take on c4, but this obviously is a beautiful position for White all of a sudden. But I think there are more opportunities for White, and Leenhouts played a different move, played queen g4, which is a nice move as well. Just threatening to put the queen on one of these squares and just enter the Black position. So Black went rook e8, queen d7, rook e7, queen d8, king f7, and now as you can see there's still 2 pieces on the diagonal You can't grab the knight with c pawn because it's still pinned, but you can attack it once more with e4, and suddenly the entire black position collapses. Knight f4, bishop b4, queen a7, white takes the rook on e7, black tries to fight back and capture the white rook, but now it's just a forced checkmate. Queen f8 check, king g6, queen e8 check, king h6, and g4. And the threat of queen h5 is just a bit too much for black here. He went g6, there's several ways to win, but white found a fourth win. Queen f8 check, king g5, queen takes f6 check, king takes g4, and h3, and after king takes, black resigned, but after king takes, queen h4 is just checkmate in one. So, very nice counterattack by white, because he was under some pressure, but black just pushed a bit too quickly there. And yeah, that backfired quite a bit. So Kooleenhout's in the lead, but he's not the only one, because we also had a very unexpected result by young Dutch player Charlie Tang playing against Dutch grandmaster Sipke Ernst. And Sipke is always known for his aggressive playing style. He just wants to win every game basically, and that doesn't always work out the way he wants. And I can really advise you to click through the entire game. I'm not going to show you because it's going to take too much time. So many interesting things happened, but I'm going to show you the position after move 19. White just played knight b3, and here Sipke already is in some trouble, but as you can see he tried to mess with the position a little bit, confuse white maybe, doing everything to keep winning chances and keep things open and interesting. But he played bishop e6 here, and at this point white realized what is meant to happen in such a position. He went knight f4, and he very well realized that these square pawns are going to be a weakness in the black position. And I will just quickly go through the entire game, but as I mentioned, you should check this one out yourself because it's very interesting and so many things are happening. Black went bishop c4, rook e1, a5, so Sipke is trying to create counterplay on the queen side, but white just ignores. He goes d5, securing the square on e6 for the knight. Queen a6, knight e6, black takes on b4, and at this point it's very interesting to see such a young player realize the strength of the knight on e6, because he can just take the rook on f8 with check, but he doesn't want to. He wants to keep his knight on e6 on the board. A very clever decision, even though you might have missed a good opportunity by just taking on f5. For example, knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, take on g7, king takes, and bishop d4. And suddenly, with the rook coming to e7, black is in huge trouble, because all his pieces over here are not really doing anything when it comes to defending the king. But that would have been a nice opportunity, but he played knight d4, which is a fine move as well. f4, bishop takes, and now Sipke realized he needs to do something, so he took with the rook on f4, which is the best move, but it's not going to be enough, it seems. Bishop e5, knight jumping back to e6. So Sipke is trying to create counterplay, but white just realizes still what the weakness is, so he goes f4, f5, and black is in trouble. He's down the exchange. He has a few pawns here, but these pawns are going to be way too slow, and in the meantime white is just going to attack the black king. Knight f4, take the pawn on g6, king g8, queen h5, and as you can see black is in huge trouble. Bishop takes, knight takes, bishop b1, and white really played it splendidly. He didn't really make any mistake. Exchanged a few pieces, kept playing active moves, and at this point the queen goes back and he just captures all the black pawns on the queen side, just like that, one by one. And okay, black is still trying for a bit, but bishop e4, very nice move, preventing checkmate. And knight takes, well, you probably have plenty of moves, but even just take the pawn with check and then grab back the knight on e4 is just totally winning. And queen d7, bishop c6, queen d8, rook d1, pinning the knight, knight e3, queen a7, threatening checkmate on h7. Only thing black can do is go knight f7, but as we can see it's all over now. Queen e3, queen d6, and bishop b5, followed by bishop takes c4 the next move, and up a rook and totally winning. So an amazing game by Charlie Tang. What a beautiful way to win that game. Even though Sipke was really, also trying to make the game interesting and spectacular, Not for his own good though. But still, White didn't collapse under the pressure and well, played a good game. So today we have 2 players on 3 points, and the game is already underway for almost an hour now as I record this report. First board layout against Tang, the only 2 players with 3 points. So we're gonna see a lot of action, and I'm curious to see if the title players can still, you know, recover and fight again for the tournament win. So this was the report for the 3rd round of the BPB Limburg Open. Thank you for watching, and hopefully see you another time.